Hello, I'm Larry Wilson, and welcome to my first Wake Up broadcast for 2004. I would also like to say a special welcome to our new subscribers who have just joined us. Today we're going to start an investigation into the book of Daniel that will take a little while to explain, so please be patient. We're going to investigate the subject of prophetic timing. This is a complex subject that requires some explanation. You have heard it said many times, with God, timing is everything. And this is particularly true in the apocalyptic prophecies of Daniel and Revelation. Because apocalyptic timing conforms to a rule, a few words about rules of interpretation are necessary. Scholars call rules of interpretation or methods of interpretation hermeneutics. That word shouldn't scare you. It just indicates that when one approaches the study and the interpretation of the books of Daniel and Revelation, he needs to follow a consistent method, a consistent hermeneutic. I want to take you first, as we began this little investigation, I want you to look at this circuit board. And although I realize that to most people, this circuit board is just a piece of junk. Very few people would have any use for this little circuit board in its present form. Therefore, most people would say it's worthless. It's just a piece of trash. Now, if I zoom out just a little bit more so that you can see, it's not a very big board, just a tiny little circuit board. The untrained eye cannot determine why this circuit board was created. The untrained eye cannot figure out what it does. So because of ignorance, this amazing little circuit board would be regarded as a piece of junk. Pure junk. Now, an electronic technician could look at this circuit board and he could make some educated guesses about the functions or the application of it. He could reach some conclusion about what it might be useful for, but to fully determine the performance and the functions and the range of input and output voltages required and produced by this circuit board, an electronic engineer is needed. Using reverse engineering, remember this term, reverse engineering. Reverse engineering is where you take an object that has been created and you study it so that you might determine how it works and what its purpose is and what it's for. So using reverse engineering, it would take an engineer some time to make an accurate determination as to the purpose and the operating environment required by this circuit board. Now, let's suppose an engineer took a look. What would he see? How would he reach his conclusions? Well, the first clue he would have about this little board is the size of it. The size tells you something. And you can see that it's quite small. Small elements handle small currents. So if we zoom in and you can take a look and see how small these resistors are, and the transistors, and you can see a fuse right here, the engineer would quickly know that this part of this circuit board handles small amounts of current because large elements handle large currents. There's a physical rule that goes with the amount of current something in its size can handle. Second, an electronic engineer would look at the parts, and he would notice some parts that he is familiar with. He might say, well, here's a heat sink with a transistor, with a couple of transistors. Those must be power transistors. And this little black thing down here inside is a diode, or some kind of diode, maybe a Zener, or here's some resistors, these little round things here. Here's some capacitors. The engineer would examine the parts to see what he recognized so that he could make a determination about the purpose of this circuit board. Then, the engineer would study the wiring of the elements because there is a very precise wiring architecture on every circuit board. Electronic circuits are not forgiving. A bad circuit will produce a fried circuit board in a heartbeat. Every element, that is, every chip, transistor, resistor, capacitor, transformer, and diode on this circuit board is arranged according to a well-known rule. This rule is called Ohm's law. Let's go to the computer screen for a moment. This rule that governs the architecture is called Ohm's law. It was named after Georg Ohm, the 19th century German physicist who discovered the consistent electrical relationships between current, resistance, and voltage. Ohm observed the behavior of a phenomenon called electricity, which God designed when He created Earth. Now, electricity wasn't known, until the 18th or 19th century, and Dr. Ohm discovered the behavior of electricity, which God had created thousands of years earlier. Dr. Ohm, or Georg is his name, his first name, he wrote down his observations in the form of an equation, and today, Georg's discovery is called Ohm's law. The point here is that an electronic engineer could take this circuit board and with the help of a reference book on IC chips, integrated circuits, and Ohm's law, he could determine the purpose of this little circuit board as well as the operating voltages of this device, because this little board conforms to Ohm's law. Now, look at this board for a moment and understand that this device that you're looking at sits in a perfect electrical balance. Each element is connected to other elements according to Ohm's law. And the result is that it works as designed. This little circuit board is a power supply out of my computer. And I thought you might like to see and understand that when you look at this little circuit board, the parallel is looking at Bible prophecy. All the parts of Bible prophecy fit together to form one perfect, balanced circuit. There's one purpose. There's one solution. And once you understand the operation of the parts and what each one does, as well as the various components and what they do, then lo and behold, the purpose becomes known. And it's quite exciting. So it is. To the untrained eye, apocalyptic prophecy is not understandable. It is a collection of visions about beasts and horrible things that literally mean nothing. Today, apocalyptic prophecy is regarded by many people as Bible trash. Bible trash. This is a little phrase I've coined because a lot of people trash the books of Daniel and Revelation by saying, oh, you can't understand that. I don't need to know about that. I don't need to know about that in order to be saved. So they're trashing it. They're calling it Bible trash. If it had no value, if it was not important, why did God put it in the Bible? Good question. But look again. Every element, and there are about 200 of them, in the 17 apocalyptic prophecies of Daniel and Revelation are deliberately wired to each other. All of the elements are deliberately wired to each other in a unique way so that they support one another. When it comes to truth, there is perfect harmony in the sum of all the parts. If we apply valid rules of interpretation to Daniel and Revelation, like Ohm's law, if we apply Ohm's law to the little circuit board, we can figure out eventually what the little circuit board is all about and how it works and what it needs. We can figure out what should go to those two wires. We can figure out what belongs with these two wires. And we can understand what the purpose of these wires are. My point here is that if we apply valid rules of interpretation to Daniel and Revelation, we will be able to accurately determine the purpose and the outcome of apocalyptic prophecy without much trouble, because the rules dictate the meaning. Wow, what an introduction, huh? See, I want you to understand that when we approach the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation with the right tools, actually the right rules, the purpose and the meaning of prophecy unfolds like a flower. We get to see what God wants us to know. Rules of interpretation keep us in the straight and narrow path of reaching the intended meaning of prophecy. Without rules, it's a free-for-all. Everybody is free to make Bible prophecy say anything and everything they want it to say. And of course, what happens in those cases where there are no rules, people make up their view of what they want the Bible to say so that it's consistent with what they already believe. See, most people don't have a mechanism that will allow them to say things, the Bible to say things that they don't want to believe. The Bible becomes a book we use to support what we want to believe. Unfortunately, that's the case for most Christians. This is why the rules of interpretation are essential. And if you think that I'm giving you in this series on Daniel just ideas and concepts that Larry Wilson has dreamed up in his head, you've missed the point. You've missed the entire point of what I'm trying to tell you. I'm trying to tell you that there are a set of rules that govern the interpretation of Bible prophecy. And it is your privilege to test these rules and to prove them true or false. Let's review the 4 rules of interpretation that I follow. And I believe they're valid because of the harmony that comes from the sum of all the parts. But let's review them, because we're about to get into some very deep water, and if we don't understand the operation of the rules, we will soon end up in water over our heads in no time. If you have a copy of my little Daniel book, and I hope you've been reading and studying this, and if you haven't obtained a copy, I hope you certainly will take advantage of the generous offer. You can get one for just $10. But on page 29 in this little book, I have listed the 4 rules of interpretation that I have found to be valid, that I have found to be true, that I have found to be essential to understanding what Bible prophecy is all about. Now, understand there's 5 types of Bible prophecy, and each type of prophecy has its own set of rules. if you take the rules of apocalyptic prophecy and you merge that with messianic prophecies, you're going to have total confusion on your hands, because each type of prophecy has its own distinct rules. You know, there are rules governing everything that God has made. Whether we are talking about physics, math, biology, music, language, electricity, or prophecy, God follows a consistent architecture in all of His creations so that we can understand something of His creative actions. Music sounds good because it follows certain rules. Math works because it follows rules. How much time did you have to spend learning English grammar? I still struggle with it. The rules of English grammar are complicated, but they're rules. There are rules in biology about the order of life and its functions. God has put rules in electricity. Georg Ohm discovered those rules and wrote it in a formula called Ohm's law. There are rules in prophecy as well, because God follows a consistent architecture. If He didn't, everything would be chaos. There would be no reason. There would be no ability, no reasonableness to anything that God has done. A consistent architecture can be expressed in the form of rules. Why does 2 plus 2 equal 4? Is it because your first grade teacher said so? No, it's because of the laws of addition. That's why. And 2 plus 2 is 4 no matter where you go on earth. Now, what about 3x plus 5 equals 14? Here's a simple algebraic equation with one unknown. Because of the laws of addition and subtraction, multiplication and division, we can solve for x. Algebra has 6 rules in it. And once you understand the rules, you can solve any algebraic problem. If x equals 3, you have 3 times 3, which is 9, plus 5, which would be 14. In other words, a consistent architecture can be expressed in the form of rules, and the equations will conform to those rules. The rules of apocalyptic prophecy, okay, listen carefully, were sealed up in the book of Daniel until the time, the appointed time of the end, for the benefit of the final generation. We uniquely need to know what God is about to do, because we live at a time when God is about to do things He hasn't done before. That's why we need to know. The rules of apocalyptic prophecy were sealed up in the book of Daniel until the time of the end. By unsealing Daniel, God has compassionately lifted a great veil so that we can understand what He's going to do, how He's going to do it, why He has to do it, and when He will begin. God has mercifully shown us what, how, why, and when. Let's look at Rule 1. Rule 1 states, and these are my words, I'm describing a consistent architecture that I have observed using my own words, okay? Each apocalyptic prophecy has a beginning and ending point in time, and the events occur in the order they are given. Very simple little rule. Let's notice these 2 examples. Here in example number 1, we have the prophecy that is found in Daniel 2, verses 31 to 35. This is the dream of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar saw a head of gold, and that was followed by a chest of silver. That was followed by thighs of bronze, brass. That was followed by a kingdom represented by legs of iron. That was followed by feet that were made up of iron and clay. That was followed by toes, 10 toes, made up of iron and clay. And then the seventh kingdom is the great rock, which comes out of the sky and hits the image at its feet and crushes it. So here in Daniel chapter, the very first apocalyptic prophecy in Daniel, we find that this prophecy has a beginning point in time, has an ending point in time, and the events occur in the order in which they're given. I hope that makes sense to you. Now, let's look at example number 2. This is the first prophecy, apocalyptic prophecy, in the book of Revelation. It begins with Revelation 4:1 and goes through chapter 6, verse 17. Now notice the blue X's here on your screen. This represents the Revelation 4:1 through 6:17. This is the story, let's say, of the seals. And then you'll notice the red Y's, because the letter Y here represents a different prophecy that begins after verse 17. And then the letter Z, you'll notice these black letters, that represents even a third prophecy. So in the book of Revelation, we have this prophecy, and then this prophecy, and then this prophecy. And the neat thing about each of these prophecies, they have a beginning point in time, they have an ending point in time, and the events occur in their order. And then when the order is broken, we start a new prophecy. Revelation 7:1, as you're about to see, starts a new prophecy because the old one has come to an end. The chronological order has been broken. Rule 1 has been violated. Every time Rule 1 gets violated, you start a new prophecy. What does Rule 1 say? Each apocalyptic prophecy has a beginning and ending point in time, and the events occur in the order they are given. So, as you're reading along, and you're following the order of the story, and then you come on the next verse and you say, that has to happen before this. In other words, this event does not follow after that event. Therefore, I have a new prophecy. Okay? I want to demonstrate this to you. I'm going to read a few verses from Revelation chapter 6, which of course is the 6th seal. I watched as he, that is the Lamb, opened the 6th seal. You know, that's the book sealed up with 7 seals. Here is the opening of the 6th seal. There was a great earthquake. When Jesus opens the 6th seal, there will be a great earthquake. The sun turned black, like sackcloth made of goat hair. The whole moon turned blood red, and the stars in the sky fell to earth. Physical phenomenon. When Jesus breaks the 6th seal, there will be an earthquake. The sun will turn dark, black. It'll be eclipsed. The moon will turn red, and the stars in the sky will fall to earth, as late figs drop from a fig tree when shaken by a strong wind. The sky receded like a scroll, rolling up, and the Bible says, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. When Jesus appears in clouds of glory, this little planet will go into an earthquake that will actually move every mountain and every island from its place. The kings of the earth, the princes, the rich, the generals, the mighty, and every slave and free man hid in caves and among the rocks of the mountains. They called to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can stand? So when Jesus appears, the wicked run for cover like cockroaches running for cover after they've been exposed to the light. Now, that's verse 17. Now, notice the next verse, which will be chapter 7, verse 1. After this, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth to prevent any wind from blowing on the land or the sea or on any tree. Then I saw another angel coming up from the east, having the seal of the living God. And he called out in a loud voice to the 4 angels who had been given power to harm the land and the sea, "Do not harm the land or the sea or the trees until we put a seal on the foreheads of the servants of our God." Okay, what have we seen here? I want you to carefully watch this. Here we've been reading in the prophecy in Revelation 4 through chapter 6, verse 17. Here is the second coming. Here is in verse 17 is where the rich and the generals and the mighty men call for the rocks and the mountains to fall upon them. And then here in 7:1, we see the 4 angels holding back the 4 winds until the 144,000 are sealed. Well, obviously, that doesn't happen after the second coming. So, we have a new prophecy. Rule 1 has been broken. The order of this prophecy will not work. You can't go X, 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 and then Y. You have to terminate this prophecy in chapter 4, verse through 6:17, and you start a new one because the order, the chronological order, has been broken. When the chronological order of events is broken, a new prophecy begins. Wow, that's what Rule 1 is all about. And when we continue in the second segment of our study today, we're going to continue looking at the Rules 2, 3, and 4. The reason that I want to go back over these rules is that people don't understand the importance of them. They don't understand how essential the rules are for producing the conclusions that we understand, that we should understand. You have to have valid rules of interpretation to get to the intended meaning, or you will never be able to figure out the purpose of apocalyptic prophecy. Without Ohm's law, an engineer could never figure out why this was made the way it is. But with an understanding of Ohm's law, an engineer can take this apart and figure out exactly what it does and what it's for. And the same is true for us in studying Bible prophecy. God has given us His Word, which is like this circuit board, and with the right kind of tools and the right kind of rules, we can take it apart and discover what God wants the final generation to understand. The book of Daniel has been unsealed, and we'll continue with our study in just a moment.